Welcome to Sunday Politics South. Coming up on today's show, is there a funding crisis in our schools when head teachers say they're having to ask parents to pay for pencils, books, even toilet paper? It's D- and no gold star for the government, and is giving councillors their own pot of money to provide funding for things they think are important, a recipe for vanity projects, or a really good way to put money into schemes that might otherwise get ignored.
Before, the area was all uneven and it meant that Samuel's trolley couldn't move around, and so his area of play was restricted. But since it's been down and level, he's just able to participate alongside his peers so much better than before.
All that and plenty more in the next half an hour. First, let's meet the two politicians who will be with me for the whole of today's programme. Annalisa Dodds is the Labour MP for Oxford East, and Royston Smith is the Conservative MP for Southampton Itchen. Welcome to both of you. We've got to talk about Brexit. And do you mind the public saying, "The fools, it's all chaos, it's terrible"?
I mean, I think there is a huge amount of frustration and a lot of people saying, why on earth can't we have some kind of agreement? I have to say I share their frustration. I think in particular the Prime Minister has got to be much more open.
And do you pass that on within the party? And do you say to
absolutely.
Jeremy Corbyn, why don't you go and bang on his door?
Well, he has been. That's the problem. He's been trying to have this meaningful engagement around particularly whether we can talk about a customs union, very, very important for us in this region. And unfortunately, he's not got anywhere. So that has been frustrating. We're going to keep trying. And I think now Jeremy is saying, well, can he talk to other people in the Conservative Party if the Prime Minister isn't willing to listen? And obviously,
he's trying to go through the back door now.
Well,
I mean, that's not exactly helping the negotiation.
He's been very, very open about that. And, you know, ultimately, initially, I think people were talking about the Prime Minister saying that some people said that she was strong. Now, those people have switched to saying she's just being very, very rigid and stubborn. And I'm afraid that is what's happening now. She's just not willing to talk to anyone really beyond her own party. So
how much of this has come down to personalities now, the individuals, the Prime Minister particularly, Royston?
Well, some of it almost certainly has. I mean, it'd be ridiculous to say that it hasn't. But this is a great example of why people think that we can't get on in Parliament, because Annalise will say that Jeremy Corbyn has been trying to speak to the Prime Minister and she won't speak to him. But we know, don't we, that the Prime Minister was trying to speak to Jeremy Corbyn and he point-blank refused. In fact,
Hillary... They had a meeting
after that, they did. Hang on. This is the whole point. This is the whole point. And this is what people see, you interrupting me trying to get my point out, and then they say, look, it's chaos up there. And there is the point.
To be fair, you're criticising.
You see what I mean?
Keep going. Explain what happened afterwards. Yeah, explain what happened afterwards. I'll give you the chance.
You're very kind. You're much too generous with your time. The point I'm making is, that is the problem, isn't it? We've got people got different views, people that want different things, and Annalise will say that Jeremy Corbyn is knocking on the Prime Minister's door so that she will adopt his customs union idea, and she is saying, knocking on his door, saying, come and see me, at which point he refused, to say, why don't you come and endorse or accept my idea? And the problem that people have when they're watching this is they all want us to have their idea. Yeah. And if we all did, it would be fine.
Listen, I've known you two for quite a while. You're both reasonable human beings, but you're both in political parties. But in many ways, those labels have gone completely. Why can't you just behave like human beings as a group of people in Parliament? What's stopping you?
Well, we are. You only see, a few minutes of people debating in Parliament. You only see Prime Minister's question time, and you're always there in a ringside seat to watch that. Yeah. But the reality is, most of the work we do together is very measured, very balanced, very reasonable.
But on Brexit in particular, why have we not maybe handed it over to somebody else, or the committee, the Brexit committee, or something like that? Select committees work very well. Both of you do that.
I think what's changed, and I think it's a very, very serious point, actually, what has changed in British politics is that for a very long time we did have parties and MPs who generally would compromise. I mean, you know, I campaigned to remain in the EU. We had the referendum, we had that result. You know, if we were able to have a much less damaging Brexit than what is being presented at the moment, you know, people like me, if that was the only way out of this, they would accept that. I think the problem we have at the moment in Parliament is we've got a small number of people on the very, very hard Brexit side, this European research
blaming
group.
Conservatives again.
No, but hang on,
Peter.
Well. Hang on, Peter. Hang on. Have we seen that group at any point say that they're willing to compromise? No, we haven't. And, you know, people like me, a number of people in Royston's party of Conservatives, they've also said, OK, you know, any outcome probably isn't going to be
you're
perfect
still pushing
for all of us.
You're still pushing for the customs union. You're still backing Jeremy Corbyn. OK,
but we've not seen any move towards anything, even that would be halfway there, to be fair.
Royston, you are one of those group who are voting against. I know you're not European Reform Group, but you're with them and you've voted with them and you're waiting for the DUP.
No, I voted with myself,
Okay,
Peter. The European
trying to be fair.
maybe voted with me. I mean,
Okay,
there's still that
you
thing
voted
where
the same way for a little
I voted
while.
the same way as them.
What's it going to take? Are you playing a game with the Prime Minister in terms of saying, look, I want this or I need that, or, you know...
Of course. You know, everyone is trying to get the best possible deal in what they believe is the right thing to do. And Annalise is absolutely right to be trying to get the best thing that she believes is in her interest and the interest of her constituents. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I'm doing the same. And what I would say, though, and, you know, here you go, there's the announcement, if you like, is that when it gets to a position where I think that the withdrawal agreement is the best option, then as a grown-up, you sometimes have to acknowledge you've pushed as far as you can or you've got as much as you can, and sometimes
How close are you?
the bigger battle is to get the best rather than
How
wait
close
for
are
the
you to
perfect.
backing the withdrawal agreement, and do you need a fig leaf to get out? Do you need some sort of excuse to say, OK, now I've got this, I can go?
I'm closer than I was, and I'm closer than I was for two reasons. One is because the Attorney General's advice is better, albeit not ideal, and we talked about this, about time limits and the rest before. And secondly, the alternative now that is staring at us is a potential of not leaving at all. So if I was given the choice of the withdrawal agreement, if it was just literally that choice, the withdrawal agreement or not leave at all, I would take the withdrawal agreement. But I didn't believe that we were there, and I'm still not sure we're there yet.
And how close are any Labour MPs, maybe not your front bench and all the rest of it, to actually supporting the withdrawal agreement?
Well,
to make Brexit happen?
We can't support something
You will
that's
never?
going to...
Is it a complete
if
red
you
line?
let me finish the sentence, Peter.
Okay.
We can't support something that's going to be immensely damaging. And actually, the other possibility that Royston didn't mention is, of course, leaving without a deal or having a Brexit deal that would be very, very damaging to our economy. And unfortunately, what I see in terms of the options being presented right now by the government are either no deal, and we know the awful impact that would have on our industry, in particular manufacturing in the south, or a Brexit deal that we're being presented with just now, which might get us over not having that no deal, but which would lead to a slow continuation of that reduction in investment that we're already seeing. And I can't look my constituents in the face and support something that's going to lose them jobs in the long run. I just can't do it.
Thank you, both of you, for your honesty. And I'm not going to ask you to predict anything, because that would be another can of worms. Still to come on today's show, there's controversy surrounding the funds that councillors in Oxfordshire can spend on projects of their own choosing.
They can then go round the villages and the areas they've done it, having their photographs taken with little things that they've done in the community, and that enhances their ability to get elected.
Now, chances are, if you're a parent with children of school age, you got a letter from their head teacher last week. It's part of the Worthless campaign that heads around the country have been waging to draw attention to what they argue are serious funding shortfalls in our schools.
Teachers from one primary school in Southampton protesting this week over funding problems, which they say means they can't pay for the basics.
I'm getting a little bit sick and tired of having to put all of my wages into, like, buying resources for my classroom, from pens and pencils, paper, laminating pouches.
Just one school, many others would recognise the problems. And yet at PMQs, the Prime Minister was insisting school funding is at record levels.
I recognise that we have been asking schools to do more. We've responded with 1.3 billion extra investment going to our schools across this year and next. So the core schools budget will be rising by around 2.6 billion in total. And overall per pupil funding is being protected in real terms by this government. Every school is attracting at least 1% more per pupil by next year, and thousands of schools will attract significantly larger gains of up to 3% per pupil per year.
In the spring statement that followed, just minutes later, the Chancellor made no mention of any extra funds to address head teachers' concerns. Joining me now, Jules White, head teacher at Tandridge House School in West Sussex, and you're the person who's been coordinating this Worth Less campaign. We've spoken to you about it before.
Yes.
Are you having an impact? Is it making any difference?
I think there's been some impact. I mean, I think, first of all, politicians across the political divide are beginning to accept that the points that we've been making, they know that budgets have been incredibly tight and that we've lost in real terms. I think the government does need to be given some credit. They've introduced a new national funding formula. They've made some pay grant awards and some contributions to pensions, but it's still nowhere near enough.
But there is a lot of money going in. We
always hear about the money going in to schools, and of course one of the contentions that head teachers have is that you can't just assume that money going to school if you don't look at the costs as well, and the costs have been absolutely significant, and all the independent evidence says that there's been an 8% real terms reduction in school funding since 2010, and that's because of things like contributions to pensions, pay, a loss of grants, apprenticeship levy. I could go on and on, but all in all, our budgets have been reduced in real terms.
Sending letters home, is it the right thing to do? I mean, parents are going to be swayed by an individual head teacher at the school their children go to. Nobody's going to turn around to you and say, well, hang on a minute, no, I don't want to do this.
Well, I think to start with, we've lobbied MPs behind the scenes and we've lobbied the DFE privately and we've made our points, but we weren't getting the type of movement that we needed, and we're part and parcel of our community. I feel very strongly about the community that I work in, as do head teachers up and down the country, and we felt that we had a duty to tell parents the truth. Nobody's ever said that we've been factually incorrect. We've simply not overstated things. Our campaign motto is to be relentlessly reasonable. We're doing that all the time, but we are seeing really significant things. The things that get mentioned often now are pens, paper, toilet roll and so on. Of course, those things are important, but there are really significant cuts going on within our school. Class sizes are rising.
You could do something about it. You could have bigger class sizes, couldn't you, and fewer teachers, and then pay for the pens and the toilet roll.
I think once you get above 30 and 35, if you've ever tried teaching GCSE mathematics with 30, 15 and 16-year-olds, very, very telling exams. I think that you want to have the best. I think parents don't want to see class sizes rising. They also want the type of services around their child, the support services, the social care, the pastoral care, and more schools are at the front line of that. We've seen significant cuts elsewhere, and that is having a significant impact. We wrote this time that the children that are often bearing the brunt of these cuts are often the most vulnerable. In my school, I'm having to use what's called the pupil premium funding. That's funding that's designated for disadvantaged children and families. I'm having to use it to prop up my core budget. We're also seeing, I think all politicians recognise the problems around SEND and high needs funding. We are all so concerned about that. Just because a youngster's education may be a little bit more expensive because they need more one-to-one support, they need more involvement from other adults, other support services, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't deliver. And that's what we as head teachers are doing within our community. And parents are absolutely right behind us. All the time, parents are saying, thank you very much. We're not doing it in an exaggerated way. We're not being overblown, but we are very, very concerned.
You only get one chance at education. And surely, if you're not investing in these children, you're losing out. Society is losing out generally. Royston.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with much of what has been said. I was at a debate last week about school funding, and one of the things I said is, now, I know being reasonable is the right approach in my opinion, but not everyone is, and not everyone has been, certainly not with me. And the point that I try to make is that if we can acknowledge, and you have, and I pay tribute to you for doing that, acknowledge that there is more in schools than ever before, that there's more money than there was before.
But it's not enough.
But it's not enough.
And money's actually being taken away from those people.
They were the very words that I used in the debate, and I made that point straight to the Minister, and it's not lost. But what I did say there as well is about the reasonableness. I think that is really, really key. So if you take some of my colleagues, Tim Lawton's a great example, who's lobbied behind the scenes relentlessly. Part of the 1.3 billion uplift was for people like him that did precisely what head teachers were asking them to do, to lobby ministers directly. What happens too often, because we know about pensions and we know about SEND and we know about the pressures that schools are facing, but what happens too often is the type of debate, and certainly in Southampton it's been with me, pushes people into a corner where they defend their position rather than trying to acknowledge what the problems are and trying to sort them out. But otherwise, those challenges that schools are facing, I absolutely acknowledge, and I absolutely think that they need more money for schools. I've made that position really clear.
It is an austerity thing in the end, though, isn't it? It is the government trying to save money overall.
The problem is, though, that if you cut back on education, then in subsequent years, you'll see the impact because we won't have the skilled population that we need. We'll have many other problems arising because children haven't received that excellent education that everyone has a right to. And I have to say, one of the things I thought it was very important to do was to talk to teachers and particularly get head teachers' take on what was going on in my constituency, so I surveyed them, and the majority of them said they've had to cut back on teachers, teaching assistants, looking at other ways of saving money, had to cut back on that provision for special educational needs. And, you know, this is at a time, exactly as was just mentioned, where schools are expected to do much more than they used to be expected to. Now they're going to be expected to help with mental health and many, many different functions they're having to deal with. Unfortunately, a real surge in crime amongst young people, secondary schools. They're trying to deal with that, but with their costs going up and the funding not rising to keep pace with that. And this is a false economy, because in the long run it'll cost us. Is
it a generation that have come through with austerity now who have lost out? And are we reaping the consequences now? Knife crime, for example.
Yeah, I think one has to be careful about headline issues like knife crime, but I do think that we are not giving the type of service that we would want. There are knock-on effects. We like it, whether we like it or not, there's a real concern about a teacher shortage now. That's probably because teachers are overworked and they're being asked to do lots and lots of additional things. We know that social mobility is not where it wants to be. That's what's brought myself and many others into the profession. We want to see youngsters doing that. I think there needs to be a change of debate. I think that what we need from Damien Hinds as Secretary of State is going to the Treasury and talking about schools and school funding as an investment for the future. We all need that. We've just been talking about Brexit. Boy, oh boy, do we need an investment in our children.
There is supposedly a war chest building up, and you've put yourself at the top of the queue.
We hope so.
Thank you. Now, you'd think councillors would be happy to be handed £15,000 to spend on what they wanted, wouldn't you? Well, in Oxfordshire, a councillor priorities fund has split members, with some saying it should be scrapped. Are the pots of money being spent on the whim of individuals or on support for grassroots projects which would have little chance of getting support otherwise? Our Oxfordshire reporter Bethan Nimmo has the story.
47. Now we need a bonus.
It's not a huge lottery windfall, but how would you spend £15,000?
I'd probably go on holiday and buy a new car, probably.
Take a trip somewhere.
We'd go to the Canary Islands.
What would you do there?
Lay on the beach, drink drinks with umbrellas.
I'm with her, so I'm doing the same thing.
I do my garden up, got a bit of decking, a barbecue space, man cave, all that kind of stuff,
But it's different when you hand over £15,000 to a councillor. Being community-minded people, they're bound to spend it on something a little less frivolous. Cash from a new councillor priorities fund in Oxfordshire has gone to a wide variety of things: buses, speed signs, helping homeless people, or even making playtime better. Samuel couldn't play on the old area here. His mum says resurfacing it has made a huge difference.
Before, the area was all uneven and it meant that Samuel's trolley couldn't move around, and so his area of play was restricted. But since it's been down and level, he can get everywhere and he's just able to participate alongside his peers so much better than before.
And it was funding from Councillor Ian Corkin's £15,000 budget that helped get the project going.
The most difficult pound to get when you're fundraising is the first pound. Once you've got that, then you get the opportunity then to say you've got the endorsement of the county council with the funds they've given. That satisfies the governance question, and other organisations are more likely to be interested in helping.
But though the fund's proving popular here, some aren't so sure. Liberal Democrat Tim Bearder has handed his entire fund to the Maple Tree Children's Centre, something he says the council should be funding centrally.
What I've done here is spend all my money in one go, and that's actually quite controversial because it means that villages will miss out on money, but I think it's the only responsible thing to do.
And he says too many councillor budgets are being spent on vanity projects.
certain councillors are using the priority fund in order for them to get re-elected. So they're using it on small things like speeding signs, painting fences. All of that are kind of worthwhile, but they can then go round their villages and the areas they've done it, having their photographs taken with little things that they've done in the community.
So you're saying you're not going to have a picture of you outside the children's centres on election campaign leaflets and that kind of thing?
You're here now, so obviously I'm going to make some event of it in the press and I will have my picture taken, but that's because I want to raise the issue and show people how important it is.
Projects like this have undoubtedly benefited from the Councillor Priorities Fund. But that is after the County Council cut £6 million from children's centres across Oxfordshire. The entire Priorities Fund only adds up to just under £2 million over 2 years. So the small amount of money that councillors can now give out at their discretion hardly makes up for the cuts that services have seen. Labour is worried the fund means some areas are overlooked.
You're going to get winners and losers, and it's clear that actually the money gets skewed away from the poorest communities because that's where more money is needed. Whenever it's council taxpayers' money, it's part of a bigger budget that really should be spent strategically.
Thanks to Council Leader Ian Hudspeth, the wheels on this bus project are still going round and round. It was set up when the Bartons were left without public transport due to cuts. Volunteers here welcome the cash boost, but do individual councillors really know where money is best spent?
I think it's about local councillors making local decisions on the local priorities. There are differences. There's not one size that fits all right across the county. It's a varied county, rural areas, urban areas, and different priorities are in different divisions.
One of the criticisms is this is just a way of councillors winning votes.
I'd certainly say not. It's about actually councillors delivering local priorities for local communities.
There are certainly a lot of demands on council cash at the moment and plenty of arguments about where the money goes. But if councillor budgets prove popular with voters, perhaps that makes them more likely to continue.
It gets the county council endorsement, as they say there. You know, this is a project which is being supported, and then maybe that opens the door to other funds. And isn't it about devolution? In the end, it's local decisions. The councillor knows the local area.
Well, in practice, a lot of what we've just seen described in that clip are activities and different developments that should be paid for by the county council anyway. And I think it's been quite worrying to see what's been happening in Oxfordshire, where we've had huge amounts of money stripped out of children's centres, for example, and youth services. Now, short-term little buckets of money that you can bid for, but that aren't providing any kind of sustainable services. I mean, just this morning I was talking to some people saying, look, there's no sustainable funding for that early intervention at the moment for families who are struggling, and that's not saving anything in the long run. So, you know, this seems like another little short-term solution to kind of placate some councillors, not really to deal with those long run.
Do you not agree that in some cases it might be efficient? It might be the way of getting something working which otherwise would be bureaucratic?
Well, surely if for one village there should be a sign indicating that there's a speeding problem, that should be everywhere across the county where there's a problem with speeding. And I think to just say, oh, well, you might be able to get a little bit of money for dealing with that from your councillor, when actually most of these are responsibilities people would think should be covered by their local council, is a bit strange. And as I say, that's in a context where we're told, oh, well, on youth services, on other forms of services, we'll have this little bucket for now, and then you'll just have to cope on your own kind of thing. I don't really think that's a good way to run a council, personally.
And the criticism is it could be a vanity project in some way. What do you think, Royston? Is it a good idea or not?
I don't really like it. I think it was introduced. There was talk about introducing it in Southampton at one point, and I do think that councillors have some sort of opportunity to bid for money from the council for schemes, but not in the way that they have control over it. So I do think there's an element of that where the city council do allow a certain amount of funding that they can say, we need this as a priority, and the council potentially will do it, but not. I never did like that. I remember when I can't remember a charity that I was involved in were looking for some money, and one of their county councillors said, well, you know, they never use their money. If they've got any left by sort of February or March, then you're in for a good shout because they need to use it up. And then I thought, actually, I don't know, this is a great idea. So I'm not a big fan.
In the end, it's taxpayers' money, isn't it? And it needs to be properly spent and properly administered. Right. Now, our regular roundup of the political week in the South in 60 seconds.
developer who put nets over trees to deter nesting birds has been ordered to take them down. Covering the 11 trees on the site in Guildford is legal, but delays in planning for the new flats means the nesting season will be over before work starts. Some would like to see a net put over these too, but flying drones can be worthwhile with proper constraints, according to Aviation Minister Liz Sugg, who praised a Southampton pilot project.
They're doing brilliant projects there, so we don't want to restrict that, and it's always possible to apply for an exemption to this no-fly zone.
The government unveiled more details of the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, completing the east-west rail link and building 1 million new homes by 2050. In Freshwater on the Isle of Wight, though, a lack of demand for school places has seen the village school scheduled for closure, despite protests from parents.
They're behind it. They do not want the school to close, basically. It is the heart of Freshwater.
It's interesting to contrast that. A small village losing its village school makes no sense. And at the same time, 1 million houses being built along that Oxford-Cambridge. I know we need the houses, but it just seems a funny thing, different things happening in different places.
Well, we really need to see a rebalancing of our economy. Of course, it's not just in our region, it's right across the whole of the UK. But in the meantime, we need to deal with the massive housing crisis that we've got. And as was mentioned, we have had these proposals around the ARC just released. I'm concerned there's not enough in there about social housing and genuinely affordable housing. And actually, I've pushed that point.
What is it you're worried about? They'll all be too expensive for
Exactly.
Oh, right.
And in fact, I made that point to the Housing Minister, Kit Malthouse, very recently this week. But also we need to make sure, of course, that this is done in an environmentally friendly way. And we're just seeing all those school children taking action around that issue recently. And certainly a number of them have been saying to me, well, you know, we support, for example, a new railway line, but we're concerned about other aspects of this, particularly potentially a big new road, if it's going to have those really negative environmental consequences. So we need to think about this in that context too.
Sure. Isn't that in a way, though, the Pyleham High thing that you were saying about with the council? Rather than lots of little schemes, you've got to make it everywhere, and it's easier to do it in one big situation like that, where you're building 1 million houses in one go and the road. And,
with the ARC, well, yeah. I mean, they've got to be, I would hope that all of those homes will have easily accessible public transport. That's particularly important. If they're only accessible by roads, then that's bad for the people who are going to be living there and bad for the environment.
Do you know the little village in Freshwater on the island? They all walk to school. That's the point. So you get, but is it economical if there's only, I think it was 8 children applying for that year?
Well, the school is not economical, but it makes sense, doesn't it, to make it economical by having some more housing perhaps in those areas. And I know how difficult it is. And talking of Kit Malthouse, you know, he's saying about, you know, if you can get the architecture right and the you know, the sustainability right, then you'll get rid of a lot of the complaints and objections. So if you can
it's
make
not just building in the back garden, but something smaller scale.
So make that village more sustainable, and then the school's more sustainable. That's not to say they don't need the big schemes as well, because we do have a significant problem with housing. So I'd like to see some of those villages and the village schools to be more sustainable on the back of it.
OK. Thank you very much, both of you. That's all for us for this week. Thank you to my guests, Annalisa Dodds from Oxford and Royston Smith from Southampton. Next week, we're going to be looking at the confusing range of restrictions on where you can walk your dog. And who knows, maybe talking about the fact that Theresa May's Brexit deal has passed at the third time of asking. Or maybe not. See you then.